the entry point for me was just kind of following the lead. And what I didn't realize was once I got in there and I started to work with entrepreneurs and I could see my journey, becoming a professional athlete in their journey in launching a company, building an idea, scaling it, getting other people to validate it. Once I was able to make that connection, it opened up the world to me in a completely different way.
Welcome to another episode of The Winning Formula. I am your host, Joel Kalani. We are here with a very special guest today. Saints Hall of Famer, Super Bowl champion, and founding partner of Champion Venture Partners, Mr. Marques Colston. Thank you so much for being here today.
Appreciate you guys having me today.
Absolutely. I actually want to start the conversation with you on the back end, actually. I want to talk about your business acumen and your business career and how that came to be. How early into your career did you start to think about the career after the career?
So the way that I came in the league is interesting, and being a late 7th round pick, the exit door is always a little closer than I wanted it to be. But for me, I spent that first couple of years really just trying to maximize my performance on the field. And after my third year, I got injured, I want to say week 1, and ended up missing 5 games. And that was the first time that it entered my mind that this could all go away. And that was kind of when that seed got planted with me, mentally. And then, that off season, my advisors at the time just they saw something in me that maybe I didn't see in myself at the time, and they just started to push me kind of out of my comfort zone to look at some different things and look at some different opportunities. And once I got into the investment world, it was a place where a lot of my peers were just investing in at the intersection of sports and tech at the time. And, the entry point for me was just kind of following the lead. And what I didn't realize was once I got in there and I started to work with entrepreneurs and I could see my journey, becoming a professional athlete in their journey in launching a company, building an idea, scaling it, getting other people to validate it. Once I was able to make that connection, it opened up the world to me in a completely different way. And it was a world that I could play in, not just on the surface level as an ambassador or an endorser. I kind of intimately understood the strategy, intimately understood the mindset of the entrepreneur, because that was kind of my journey to becoming a player in the first place.
And that's fascinating because, at the time, we're talking about the mid 2000s, we're talking about really before social media took hold. That kind of information was not readily available. It wasn't like the resources that we have today around this stuff. Was there anyone in the league, other players, coaches that you had actually maybe met, mentored, or even just got information from that kind of showed you the light or maybe directed you in some way, or was it mainly the advisors?
It was mainly the advisors at first. And part of what they pushed me to do in I want to say my 4th year, I started an executive MBA program at George Washington. And in that program, I was surrounded by some other athletes, Olympians that were kind of in that same boat. And once you get into an environment where you're interacting with people that have similar experiences, similar perspectives, that wall starts to kind of go down. And that for me was the ultimate confidence booster, that not only are there other people traveling the same journey, dealing with some of the same pain points that I was dealing with, but it kind of started to build a skill set that I could actually take into the marketplace and put to use outside of, who I was as an athlete and what I could bring visibility wise to a company.
It's fascinating. We had Steve Young on here some episodes ago, and he mentioned a kind of mourning that occurs after your playing career ends and you officially transition. Even if you have something waiting for you, it could be harder if someone doesn't know exactly what they're going to do next, or if an injury derails something. What was the process for you officially transitioning once you decided to hang up the cleats and decide to move forward? Was there a mourning period? Was there a period of time where you're like, weren't sure, or did you already have the roadway in front of you for exactly how you want to tackle it?
I can't say I knew exactly how I wanted to tackle it, but I can say that, one, I was fortunate enough to play 10 years, which, if you know anything about the average career length, that's 3 times longer than the average. So just being fortunate and blessed enough to have a long enough time to build a runway. And I had some ventures that I was working on, some ventures that, were successful at the time, some ventures that had failed at the time. And I just was able to stack enough skills and experiences to where I was able to, fall off that cliff that every athlete falls off of. But the skill sets and the experiences that I was building, it kind of made the cliff a little bit shorter.
Okay, good. So it was a soft landing in some
A little bit of soft landing.
Okay. Champion Venture Partners. What was the nucleus of how that came together? Your founding partner, of course. Want to hear a little bit about the framework that kind of led that to, coming into place for you and how it's grown and what's become today.
So the interesting part about Champion Venture Partners or CVP is it's not something that was on the radar, 2 years ago.
Sure.
Right around 2020, I kind of stepped away from the venture space for a while, and really I didn't have any intentions on getting back into it.
Okay.
But about 18 months ago, former partner of mine, well, current partner of mine, Nick Edwards, we just started kind of ideating around, the sports venture space, and just through conversation, we just started to think through if we were to do something in the investment world, how could we do it and do it differently? And CVP is really a culmination of, his experience, the last 15 years of me being in and around this space, and really just building something from our perspective. He's a former athlete, I'm a former athlete, and the experiences that you gain trying to navigate the venture space are different. People approach you and people perceive your value in certain ways. So when we started to venture out on and ideate around how can we build something different, we landed on a model that really solved for the athlete investor, one that created liquidity. In a world where typically the athlete career span is so short, their earning potential is so short. You're finding yourself trying to bridge the gap between your playing career and when you can access your retirement and your benefits, right? So even though you might have equity built in certain positions, you sometimes run into that liquidity crunch.
Yeah.
So we just started to ideate around how can we build a model that services the athlete with liquidity, with options, with passive investment, leaning into the sports asset class because it's something that we intimately know and have built as the product. And once we started to build it out, we started to realize that not only are we solving for the athlete investor, we're solving for the retail investor as well.
Love that. And I actually want to kind of zoom in on something that you mentioned, the sport asset class. So we can see with all our eyes the emerging valuations, not just from the big leagues, but also the emerging leagues. And you were an early investor in arena football. You kind of saw the sports asset class, I think far before what I thought was public mainstream opinion. How did that as an asset class even become something that you found to be a worthwhile investment? And what is your take now on the emerging sports and the explosion of investment that has now gone into sports leagues, irrespective of size? You're just starting to see a lot of dollars rush in. How did you have that perspective so early on the investment? And what's your take on where it's gone today?
I initially got into arena football because it was something that I could get into and understand the sports side and shorten the learning curve on the business side. And once I got inside, the opportunity to work with groups like Ted Leonsis and Zach Leonsis and Monumental Sports Group, and just see that the vision that they had for sports was much broader than the product on the field. It was a digital first version, and being on the ground floor and seeing those partnerships with DraftKings and seeing those partnerships with Facebook and Twitter come to fruition in a league that was really agile at the time. It just kind of set a trajectory for me mentally that this emerging asset class of sports leagues, there's some staying power here. And I think as we continue to see the streaming companies get into the media, the sports media conversations, as we continue to see the linear broadcast networks try to figure out how to navigate the changing landscape, I think there's a really unique space and time where, as people are still looking for sports content, people are still leaning into sports as that connective tissue of our culture. I think that there's a really good opportunity for some of these emerging leagues with media backing to become some really, really big platforms.
You've seen the trajectory of NFL, NBA, NHL valuations over the years. I'd say, at this moment, many people are starting to see the value across the board, and just the height may drive the price up. Did you find that as you progressed through your career and you became an NFL veteran, those conversations about sports asset classes and investment and venture firms, was that more prevalent by the time you left the NFL? I feel like when you entered the NFL, there was an era, and when you left, there was a different era. Do you feel like those conversations have progressed amongst athletes from the time you started playing until when you retired?
1,000%.
Yeah.
I remember at the time when I was just getting into it, it was still sports science. right? It was just a small niche that was really just based around performance. And now what you're seeing with, sports really touching everything from performance, from player performance to business intelligence to, we just had the conversation around media and tech. And, when you start to weave in NIL and what's happening on the college landscape, I think that the conversation is one that's becoming more and more expansive. And the goal really is to create more and more access points for more diverse groups to get engaged with it.
We actually have a fan-submitted segment called Crunch Time. You know a lot about Crunch Time, having won a Super Bowl and having been in high-pressure moments. Just a few light questions just to get your take as a Super Bowl champion wide receiver who played with also a Hall of Fame quarterback in Drew Brees. I'll start with a pretty light one. Is there a game that sticks out in your mind? Could be the Super Bowl win, could be another, that going into it maybe you knew was a monumental challenge, that was very difficult, that you overcame, and you look back and you're like, man, that was one of the toughest situations I've been a part of.
I'll go with my first ever game, my first ever regular season game.
Yeah.
2006, we're playing up in Cleveland, playing the Browns, and I didn't find out that I was starting in week 1 until Wednesday of that week. So, I literally walked out into the huddle. We had this walkthrough before practice started, and there's kind of this gap in the huddle where the starting X was supposed to be, and my receiver coach looked at me and said, "Get in there." And for me, going into that week 1, I didn't have enough time to prepare for the gravity of that moment. And I think it's one of those things that helped me out because I was just able to go out and play free and play fast. But I vividly remember that day. Just being a week 1 starter as a 7th round pick and just understanding that everything was out in front of me, and the ability to compete, the ability to step into a huddle and have a thought partnership with somebody like Drew Brees. As a 23-year-old kid, man, that was an incredible experience.
And did Drew Brees, Sean Payton, did they kind of bring you under their wing? Like, how helpful were they in helping you learn the game, get the game plan right, and just integrate yourself and get used to the pace and all of that? Brady and Edelman always talk about how they had to spend some times in the offseason throwing to one another just to get on the same wavelength. Was there any of that when you start to get more and more included in the day-to-day and the week-to-week?
Absolutely. I mean, that started from day one. Those two guys were just really instrumental in, they always had a vision for you as a player. And that's one of the things that I love about Sean as a coach. If he brings you in offensively, he has a vision for what you can do and what you can contribute. And like I said before, the thought partnership that they were well-accomplished guys at that point in their careers, but to be able to listen to a rookie and understand and be able to take in the feedback that I was giving them from my perspective, really making it a thought partnership to where, yes, it's time on task, and yes, it's getting a lot of reps together, but ultimately at receiver, you got to be able to see the game through the quarterback's eyes. And if there's a mutual trust in that he's seeing what I'm seeing and I'm seeing what he's seeing, he's reading my body language, those are the moments that, those two being in tune with that, but also being humble enough to take the perspective of a 23-year-old rookie meant the world, to me as a player and also our production.
Love that. And on the other end, you mentioned, learning the game and, being on the same wavelength with Drew. Was there a particular defense or defender that you went up against consistently, whether it be in the NFC South or elsewhere, that gave you fits for a long period of time? Maybe you figured them out eventually, but are there any that come to mind? Could be a big name or maybe a more under the radar one. You're like, going into this matchup, you're like, this is going to be a tough one.
Those Panthers teams, my mid-career when they had Thomas Davis and Luke Kuechly.
Yep.
Because I played a lot in the slot, so I got to meet those linebackers a little too often. But that was a tough defense. You knew it was a lunch pail kind of game. You knew you were going to get hit. You knew if you were even running a route across the middle, they were going to put hands on you. Those are some really, really good battles. And those two players in particular were kind of the heartbeat of that defense. So seeing those two guys 2 times a year was not an easy task.
Speaking of, do you think the rule changes that protect the offensive players that have been woven into the game now today, do you think that's all in all good for the game? I hear some people from the mid-2000s, the early generations say they liked the way it used to be in terms of just planning for defenses, and now they prioritize offense. Do you have an opinion on that and just rule changes, the penalties, everything that's been brought in to protect the players.
I mean, as a receiver, you love to see guys get taken care of, and you
Mhm.
love to see people not get put in those situations where you have those nasty collisions.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that coin, you're starting to see more knee injuries, more lower body injuries. So, I mean, it's a violent game, and there's really no way to root all of the violence out of the game because you kind of lose the integrity of it. So, the folks that are changing the rules, the folks that are trying to make the game safer, I don't envy their task because there's such a domino effect that you can't really control until you get the rules out and they get implemented.
Yeah.
And I think you'll see this iterative process that we've been seeing the last few years until they get to a place where they kind of find this equilibrium.
I'll get you out of here on this. In your personal opinion, from everything you've seen, obviously being a receiver, your top 3 receivers of all time, could be favorite, could be just your GOAT list personally, whether it's players that influenced you or players that you've seen since you've retired otherwise. Do you have, in no particular order, 3 top receivers in your mind that come to mind for you?
Well, I get kicked out of the club if I didn't put Jerry Rice at the top of the list.
Naturally.
Love what Randy Moss brought to the game. I think for as celebrated as he is for his athleticism, I think he's underrated for what he did just as a receiver and a technician. And I'll throw a off the beaten path name out there, Henry Ellard. Henry was he was my receiver coach down in New Orleans for a couple years, and he's just a guy that if you look at his stats and you look at his body of work, he's a guy that did it quietly, did it with a lot of humility, and the fact that he was able to take those insights and bring them and help young guys like myself along, he's always going to hold a special place in my heart, man.
Yeah.
So Henry Ellard, I'll throw him in the list too.
Love that. Great list. Yep. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a wonderful conversation across the board. That was the winning formula presented by Nasdaq. That was Marques Colston. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.